June usage stats are out now. I would call this June tier shifts, but literally nothing shifted tiers. So today, all I got for you are projected tier shifts, you know, just like last month. And I'm gonna talk about some of the interesting things that I see in usage stats. You can already see a big one right up here, just because I think it's interesting from the perspective of metagame development to see what exactly has been going on in you as of late. Of course, you've been enjoying this type of content. You love seeing the good old, hey, what is gonna happen with the tiers type of coverage. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I'm on my way to 10k subs by the end of the year, but I do need your help, so I don't click that button. And apologies if I'm randomly pausing throughout the video. I'm a little congested today, so holding on as best I can. Now, I'm gonna start off with projected shifts because I feel like this is gonna be what people find the most interesting, and I want to keep y'all here longer. So, a lot of this is the same from last month, but there are actually some new ones that I'm gonna talk about because RU players, I guess, just really want to be in you that badly, so they keep putting user mons. As you can see, Noivern and Thundurus have joined the ranks of potential risers from Inu to Aryu. Obviously, you never love to see a Mon rise, but that's why I play lower tiers, I think it's fun. So Noivern rising to Aryu, from my understanding, a lot of that's just derived from Noivern being super fast. Like, literally that's it. Like, it soft checks a lot of offense because it has the speed. And I don't know if they're running specs or not, but even though Noivern's kind of weak, if you give it offensive investment, it is going to be able to pick off your offensive Pokemon decently well. And so that at least gives it a niche there. Thundurus is pretty obvious. They just banned out Thundurus Therian. And I think it's really funny too that it looks like even if they hadn't, Thundurus T may have been rising anyway. And so Thundurus does much of the same. I saw one user post that Thundurus even does much of the same that, or not, I already just said that Thundurus was already getting usage. That's what I meant to go for. In RU, before the ban of Thundurus T. So kind of just capitalizing on the momentum that the ban gave it. Pretty interesting to see. Of course, the losses of these two Pokemon, it kind of depends on how you team build and your perspective of the meta. A couple reasons I say that. And it mostly boils down to, I've seen both Noivern and Thundurus get very varying perspectives as to how good they actually are. More so with Noivern compared to Thundurus. I think generally speaking, people believe Thundurus is a top 20 or so Pokemon in Inu, no matter who you talk to. Vast majority of the people I hear talk about Inu, talk about Inu, I should say, they do have Thundurus as one of the, like, A-rank type mons. At a point, I saw some people voting it down to, like, A-, but it never got to the point where they were like, oh yeah, this mon's just mid. Get it out of the tier. Just terrible. But with Noivern, that's not really the same. And of course, I am one of the most avid Noivern haters in the tier. I have been on record a lot recently saying that I think Noivern is pretty terrible. Not like, oh, send it to PU terrible, but I think there's a lot of issues that face it, and if you watched the viability rankings threat update video that I did yesterday, go watch that if you haven't already. It's a banger. A lot of the reason that I think Noivern's worse than Talon is generally less exploitable. Now, you could argue the same for Noivern in that it gets U-turn just like Talon, but when I look at Noivern as a remover versus Talon, I constantly feel like Noivern does not offer the same level of utility. And when you try to compromise between offensive Fogger versus defensive Fogger, it's just kind of, neither set's very convincing. Talonflame will run that same defog set no matter what, the only variation being like U-turn or Will-O-Wisp, or sometimes like Flare Blitz over Brave Bird. But it's pretty consistently useful for the reasons we talked about yesterday. You get that double, or even triple if you want, adverse contact effect core with like Flame Body Talon plus like an effect Spore Vileplume. And you're just really good at punishing the pivot spam that's really rife in Inu through mons like Flygon and Mienshao. Whereas with Noivern, it's like, even when you invest in defenses, I feel like it just dies anyway. Like, Mienshao is just one knock with Stealth Rock up away from two-shotting you into the dirt with Terra-Fighting CC. Meanwhile, then let's look at offensive Noivern versus defensive. So, They both run max speed, one's just max HP versus max special attack. I still have issues truly buying in to these bulkier Noivern that are running because of, like I just said, it still feels just a little too frail for me. But also because you are relying on Hurricane as a move. Oh god, this cough. But you're relying on Hurricane a lot of the time as your only attacking move. And yet that's really, really exploitable. Yes, you have U-turn, but when you're throwing off some of the weakest Canes ever as your means to try and deter offensive threats, it's not really that convincing. And there's a lot of Pokemon that can, of course, exploit that. You got mons like Lucario that are really common. Thundurus is really common. Of course, Magnezone loves having free real estate in your head. And there's others like them. But also, you then look at offensive Noivern, and it's like, it's honestly a fine option, I think. I just feel like the Draco drops are really, really easy to capitalize on. And then you look at defensive Noivern, it's like you can't even really run Draco, even though you'd probably rather, because it's, you know, stronger than Hurricane, more accurate. Because a bulky Noivern at -2 special attack is just way too exploitable. It is just, you let basically everything in the tier set up for free on you. At least the offensive one, it's like, there's a little more immediate threat level, I'd argue. And sure, you get the free U-turn after the fact on your bulkier variants. It just isn't enough. Like, you're still seeding it, like, for example, a free Shell Smash to Torterra. Or a free Nasty Plot to Mew. And if you U-turn on Mew, then you're giving weakness policy. That's, like, even worse, but I digress. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, Noivern as, like, a potential rise doesn't even really move me that much. Because I think at the end of the day, yeah, it takes away a team building option, which is never fun. But I haven't viewed it as a truly integral part of the meta for a while. Like, last couple months, I have not really cared for Noivern. Thundurus is, of course, a different matter. I view Thundurus as one of the most effective pivots in the tier, primarily because the coverage is just so good, and its offensive move pool is really, really nice. Beyond that, having things like, you know, Nasty Plot, Taunt for stall breaking, you can do physical stuff. You've got Thunder Wave if you really need speed control. There's a lot. It's a very customizable Pokemon, depending on what you need on the team. And that just makes it really easy to find teams where you want to use it. I already like what Thundurus does defensively, and that's just more in terms of, like, good immunities, good immunity singular, and some, like, okay resistances to give you a little bit of extra staying power versus, like, things like Shao and Nape that may try to revenge kill you. But it's that versatility that really ticks it for him, because you can find so many builds to throw Thundurus on. There's rarely a build where I'm like, oh, Thundurus doesn't fit here, in at least some regard. You punish the choice-locked EQs from Crook and Flygon. You kind of punish the choice-locked CCs even from Mienshao if they can't Terrastalize versus you. And it's just so easy to find turns to throw off your Nox, get more momentum with U-turn, boost with Plot. It does so much. It's also, of course, a really solid Slowbro beater. I say beat in quotes, of course, because Terrastalizing with Calm Mind boost, it's never, like, super clear. But it is really good at pressuring Bro with Nasty Plot. You can force Bro to Terra and maybe make it so, like, your Banded Crocodile or even just general, like, Crocodile on your team, for example, could beat it up after the fact. Pretty nice stuff to go for Mr. Thundurus. But of course, it has some restrictions. I'd mostly, like, I talked about, you know, how it kind of has defensive presence. Things like Terrified CC from Shao are still, like, really annoying. The bulk is kind of fake because you look at these really strong resisted hits and you're just cleanly two-shot, and a lot of the time, these mons are faster. And we can even go back to talk about, you know, the choice-locked EQ point. These mons have Stone Edge, like, almost all the time, and so they still can beat you. Still a really good mon. One of my favorites to use. I'd be sad if we lost it, but at the end of the day, I'll use Raikou. Kidding, I will not use that mon. But I'll use it. And now, I guess we could even talk about... I don't really want to talk too much about these mons I already said, like... I'll throw a little bit of a tidbit at the end. But things that we could end up getting back in Inu. Necrozma to Inu BL is, of course, there. It's kind of just saying, hey, if you want to retest it, sure, you can have the availability. I don't really care. Araquanid would be interesting. Of course, that's another sticky web user. It's, I'm not going to say Slowbro beater because it doesn't really beat Bro. You force it to Terra, which is pretty cool. And I mean, if you wanted to be one of those guys that runs Water Absorb Araquanid, you technically could just fully wall Slowbro with Terra Dark Arac with Water Absorb, which is pretty funny. Not gonna say it's good, but it's certainly funny. So there's an option there if you're into that. You've also got I'm trying to think. I was gonna say Subtoxic. It doesn't get Toxic anymore, but you could probably still do some substitute sets to just bother certain bulky mons. I'm sure you could run some EV spread with again things like Terra Dark maybe if you wanted to exploit Slowbro and just have a nice little wall breaker set. Coverage is a little bit awkward, but it is what it is. And Sticky Web's just generally an option. I don't know if it'd be worth it. I guess the sell would be that Water Bubble Arac is, I'm assuming, stronger than Galvantula. I'm so sorry I keep pausing. I legitimately keep coughing. But I don't know if that's really a sell that I'm too interested by. I'll give it this. I think Sash lead with Mirror Coat would be really funny. Because, you know, again, the trend you'll see a lot of people go for versus webs is lead with a pivot. And if it's a Volt Switcher, well, Volt Switch into my Araquanid, and I will Mirror Coat the hell out of whatever you bring in. If there was one thing I'd give Arac as a Sticky Web user over Galv, it's going to be this. I've done this a lot versus Galv teams, and I don't think I could do it versus Arac teams, at least as easily. Scale Shot, Loaded Ice Flygon. Really good anti-lead for those types of teams. And Araquanid would look at that and say, oh, interesting, and just one-shot Flygon after its Scale Shots. So I think that's an interesting interaction. It would at least give Sticky Web Araquanid legitimacy in the tier. That's cool. Cinccino would drop. This is either going to be like one of the worst Pokemon Inyu has ever seen, and even though people would think that it'd be good, or it's going to be incredibly broken with Tidy Up. There's really no in between. I'm not at all sold on like loaded dice, or not loaded dice, I mean just skill link wall breaker stuff, like you've seen in old gens, like Gen 7 Inyu for example. Because Cinccino's just way too weak, and in this generation, I don't even think the speed is that insane. Especially too when you consider every Scarfer in the tier is just one-shotting you or near one-shotting you. I mean, you're looking at Xiao, Infernape, Flygon. I won't say Crocodile because it's projected to rise, but those would be like the big three that you'd consider. You've even got to deal with just, I'm not gonna say a plethora of steals here, but a lot of good steals that do see pretty consistent usage, or like Registeel, Klefki, and the Zoner. You've got Knock to help out, weaken them, but there's only so much that's doing. I don't know. I think Tidy Up would still be really cool because the Mon is so fast, and that puts you above a lot of those Scarfers. You could just be Terra Ghost as well, so you'll even resist First Impression, while potentially setting up on a Scarf-locked CC from Xiao. That could be decent. It'd give Hyper Offense as well some hazard removal if you needed it, which, yay, I guess? I've talked about T-Spikes being sometimes annoying for HO, if the other team's got enough ways of stalling you out for turns. There you go. That's really all I can say. There you go. Entei would potentially drop to Inyu, and I'm going to tell y'all right now, you may think that Entei wouldn't be broken because we've got plenty of water types. I'm not sure I'd agree. We saw last gen in Inyu that Calm Mind sub protect set, you know, Vente, just like we had Vinkun, you'd have Vente. We saw that pose a lot of issues, and that was in like peak Vaporeon meta. You know, Vapo was kind of just great the entire time it was there in Sword and Shield Inyu. And that was definitely at one of the heights of its powers. Teams still didn't really feel like they could beat Entei. Because Vapo just got pressure stalled and lost. And I'm trying to think of like other Mons, and it's like Hurt would just get burned. Also stalled probably. You know, what are you doing? You're flip turning and I'm subbing again. Congrats. Gastrodon is not beating you, I don't think. It's getting PP stalled. Milotic at least has Haze. And probably, you know, it gets Marvel Scale as well. So that would help versus that set. Vaporeon, at least, again, you can still Wish Pass, flip turn, look for repositioning, but you're still dealing with the pressure PowerPoint stalling. It's a very rough set to overcome. Now, I'll give it this in terms of like favorability to unban it, or not ban it, I should say, because it's literally not banned right now. That set is still, at the end of the day, pretty passive, beyond it calm minding up. My worry would be this gen, we don't even have clerics. And so, I don't know what you do about the burn spread, even from like Bandit Inte with Sacred Fire's insanely high burn chance. I feel like that just becomes naturally a ton more problematic in this generation compared to last. Like, I don't deny that we even have checks for Inte in the tier. Like, if you're just looking at Bandit Inte, I don't feel like it's the most insane mon we've ever had, right? So, like, Flygon would check it offensively. Mienshao, I guess, would check it offensively because it's weak to rocks. But eh. Talonflame kind of checks it. I'm just unconvinced that at a point you're getting Stone Edge. Of course, Duskrock checks it. Diancie's a check, which you have to fear Ironhead. Shandy is a check, I guess. Pert's a check. And any bulky water's a check. Incineroar is technically a check as well. Basculegion's a good offensive check. You've definitely got answers. It's not like this mon just arbitrarily breaks through teams with no counterplay. It's kind of just one of those things where I'm worried it still would too easily do it. And then there's a lot of anti-offense as well to it, just because E-Speed is so insanely strong coming off that attack stat. And, you know, potential Terra normal stuff. So that's kind of my thoughts on Tay at the moment. Everything's subject to change because we don't have the mon in the tier yet, so I can't say any of this with 100% certainty. But yeah. And then Pheasantipity, I guess, could drop to Inu. I don't even know what to make of this, because RU hasn't updated their VR in a bit. So this one's sitting up at A. In theory, like, it shouldn't be dropping, I guess. I don't know if I even care about Pheasantipity dropping either. I've looked at this mod's move pool so many times and stat distribution, and every time I do, I'm just, like, amazed this Pokemon is considered viable in RU, because it just looks terrible. It looks like the most do-nothing, boring pivot of all time. Now, I don't question it, it's probably really annoying. The kicker, though, is, unlike Munkidori, you're not a Psychic type, you're a Fairy type. So you can't even reliably spread poisons. You can keep U-turning on the poisons as they come in, so, like, Pheasantipity plus Banded Flygon. Probably gonna be a good core if it drops. I don't know, man. It just seems like such a bait Pokemon. Of course, other Inu relevant shifts here that could happen. Scovillain up to Inu. Kind of just confirming what everyone said about Sun last month, which was, it's everywhere on the ladder. Help me. I thought was really funny. Copper could drop to Inu. From Inu to Piu. I feel like this does reflect my experience on the ladder, where if I had to rank the, how frequently I see the bulky or steel types, Magnezone's at the top. Probably Registeel at 2, then Klefki at 3, and then Raj is probably the 4th most. I think Lucario is 1 or 2 for usage out of them in my head. I mean, I could obviously just confirm here which one is higher between it and Zone. And apparently it is Magnezone. But then Lucario at 2, look at that. Let's see how accurate was I there. Registeel 3. Wait, Wait, what? Where's Klefki? Ah, Klefki was 3, and then Registeel 4. A little off there. Actually, no, I was right. I said Klefki would be after Zone. I'm dumb. Anyhow. It kind of reflects then my experience. I think the issue for Raj is just this gen, it's not as good of a breaker. And so people feel obligated to fully tap into Utility Copper, which is simply not that big of a threat to teams. And it also, it's like this weird combo of that, but also it lost Whip, but still seems to have the 4 move slots issue because of knockoff being gained, but also a desire by like every Raj user to have Whirlwind on it. Like without Whirlwind, you are a little bit more vulnerable to being set up on by some things like Port and Cloyster. So people run a lot of Whirlwind Raj to prevent that. The problem being then you don't have Rock Slide for Talon, but if you're trying to fit Rock Slide then on there, what are you dropping, like knockoff? Ew, no, I need to punish these other things. So, he just seems to have a lot of issues, and of course it's really easy to navigate around any. Quagsire drop into Piu. His stall's just not used, and I think people got bored of trying to use Quagsire Balance, because it kind of just kills all your momentum. It doesn't really offer a ton other than setup denial, and a lot of our setup sweepers are so naturally strong that Quag just gets pressured too easily by them. Raikou dropping. This should have happened eons ago, but I'm glad people are finally catching on. It's just not that convincing of a Pokemon. I don't even know what it is about it. Nothing about Raikou's stat distribution or even really move pool when you factor in Terastallizing suggests that it should be a particularly bad mod. Like, the ground water absorb stuff, or Gastrodon, the mod's not even used. It's like, what am I worried about? Pert, I'm scalding you and I'm burning you and I'm probably doing like 40 if I'm Specs. The grass types? Look, man, I'll be Terra Ice. You know, it just, I really don't know why Raikou is this bad. I think it's some weird combination of it's just not fast enough, but it's also just not that, like, good to use compared to Thundurus, I guess? Where Thundurus just has all the coverage naturally, and Raikou you do kind of feel obligated to Terastallize a lot of the time. It's kind of rough. And then Tentacruel potentially dropping, which is really funny since it just rose on the viability rankings thread. I do feel like this is going to be something the ladder just would have to adjust, because I do believe Tentacruel is good enough to stay in you. I think you've got a lot of nice utility tools to tap into. You got things like, you know, Toxic Spikes, Haze, Flip Turn, Knockoff. You can just run Sludge Bomb as well if you need an extra third attack. A lot of interesting things you can do. Fits well alongside Big Woe, which is cool. Very interesting Pokemon. No lie, I'm not going to talk about these again. We literally did that last video. Yeah. And I want to look at usage. I think it's pretty interesting to see many things here. So, for example, 1, Mienshao, okay, that's 2. 1, Flygon actually overtook Slowbro. This is a bit surprising, but also I think should be expected for one reason, and that is what the meta is right now. Very favorable to offense. Slowbro's frankly not that good when offense is king, and a lot of that is still determined based on what the type of offense is. But when you consider archetypes you're throwing Slowbro on, offense is never going to be one of them. It's too much of a momentum sink. And then you look at the offenses that are good in this meta. Well, they all kind of beat up those old Slowbro balances. I think some of this may come down still to, like, people trying to adjust to the cores you use Bro on for balance, because those old Bro Serena teams don't really see anymore. But you look at Sun as an archetype, it just beats Bro. It is not especially bulky. It dies to all the fire types. The Chlorophyll Mon's obliterated. Rain even. Rain overwhelms Slowbro. Things like Basculegion under Rain just strip 2-shot you with the resistances included. Ludicolo, of course, is a really good mon that just beats you up. You gotta do a Thundurus and Tornadus. It's just really, really rough. And then even just generic setup HO, I mean, Bro's just tasked to try to check too many mons at the end of the day, even with regen and slack off. It ends up being really hard. Well, conveniently for Flygon, it fits on literally every single offense build that is getting used. Maybe not Rain, but even then it does fit on Rain. We've seen some offensive Stealth Rock Flygon on these Rain teams. That's probably the worst use case for it, but it's there. You see it on Sun, you see it on Sticky Web, you see it on just generic setup spam, you see it on generic offense, you still see it on balance as well. You can see it on Fat, because it's just good offensive roll compression there. It gives you a lot of things you'd want on those fatter builds. And hell, you can see it on Stall. It really just goes anywhere you need it. So Flygon rising to the king of the tier, not really that shocking. Second interesting thing though is Xiao dropping out of top 2 usage, or top 3, I don't remember which one it was. But people are quickly realizing that Xiao has a lot of negative matchups, and oftentimes Flygon's just a bit better of a pivot. You also see Crocodile straight leapfrogging it. Some of this I think is people really, really like its offensive profile. Like, it's painfully hard to switch around. And the guessing games between generic Stealth Rock set versus Scarf versus Bulk Up, really, really painful. So, Crook gets some nods there. Talonflame, of course, trying to separate itself from Noivern. You still see some hesitancy from Ladder to truly ditch Noivern. But Talon has, at this point, solidified itself as the better flying pivot. Diancie's still holding on to top 10 usage, although you'd be hard-pressed to find a reason why outside of a decent Sun matchup. Gator as well, I have no clue why it's still this high. Never mind, I have a very clear clue why it's this high. Mew, I think, is actually seeing an uptick in usage, which reflects people's increased calls of like, hey, Mew may need tearing action. Nasty Plot Mew is really, really, really good. Especially weakness policy is a recent adjustment, I'll say, to the set. Makes it even harder to stop. And then last thing I'll mention here, Plume breaking into the 10% or higher usage threshold. People have gotten over their whole Slowbro is the only physical wall worth a running phase. So Plume's rise back up to the top of it, and you will be studied for generations. I think that's all I got for y'all today. I hope y'all enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down below on these usage stats, and you know, any of these potential drops from RU to NU. What are you thinking about them? Catch y'all next time though. Peace.